Thank you so very, very much for showing up at this very early hour. Kent is passing around breakfast treats to anybody who hasn't had breakfast yet as an inducement for thanking you for showing up. We really appreciate you being here. I'm Pete Kiefer. This is Judge Susan Sabers and Karl Thoennes both from South Dakota. I think we're going to have a really good conversation. We're going to be working for the next hour and a half talking about the ethical implications of some of the decisions that you've had to make for the last year and a half.
Do you want to say welcome?
Where's our
Do a welcome.
clicker go?
Peter, shall Mike do welcome?
Oh, we're going to welcome. I said we were going to just introduce ourselves, but okay.
Yeah.
You want to introduce us? Okay. So I just stole Mike Rowdy's job, I guess. Sorry. This is called a coffee talk. We're considering this the same as when we used to have shared interest groups. So we're assuming this is going to be a really full and robust discussion, and we're looking to you for a lot of the conversation. So I would consider this as a shared interest group where we're looking to you to know what is of interest to you, and we're going to talk about that. So we do have pre-formatted questions that are available, but we're going to admit that if you have something that you want to talk about, speak up, raise your hand, and we're going to talk about whatever you as the group want to discuss. But if we start getting crickets, we do have these pre-formatted questions, and we'll be asking you to respond to some of these questions. Remember, we're being live streamed, so it's possible that from time to time, Kent Pankey is going to yell out that they got a question from somebody on the East Coast who's watching us, so that's very exciting for us. And we really hope that we're going to have a lot of fun. The last point that I want to make is our definition of ethics is very broad. So if you have any topic that you want to discuss that even remotely touches upon ethics, speak up. And so I think it's more important that we have a good conversation about the topics that are of interest to you than to say, no, I don't think there's any ethical implication of this stuff. Let's just talk about what's really of interest. So with that, opening remarks, Karl?
Thanks, Peter. I should maybe do a sound check for the live streamers and welcome the live streamers here joining us wherever they might be in the country. Is my sound okay? Thank you very much. Let me just spend a couple minutes setting the stage. And those of you who have come to our sessions before, or those of you who are on the NACM Ethics Committee know that we talk about this every once in a while. We'll joke about, oh, we can find an ethical angle in anything. How about, judges parking? Can we do an ethical angle to judges parking? Sure, I mean, I'm sure we can find it in there somewhere. When it comes to this topic, you might wonder the same thing. COVID, okay, is there, it's a pandemic, it's a medical situation, it's a public policy situation. Is there an ethical angle in there? And what are we doing here really this morning? When we do different kinds of sessions with scenarios and speakers and we do case studies, we'll often do a disclaimer that says, you're not going to walk out of here with the right answer. And some of the session comments say that. Just tell me the right answer. Give me some clarity. One of the reasons why ethics is so fascinating is because it's full of gray areas. Sometimes you're not going to get a lot of clarity. You're not going to get the right answer when you walk out. But here's what we hope will be useful about this session. When we talk through these balancing acts, these competing considerations, we hope that these discussions, when you get back to your office, when you're in a committee, when you're in a Zoom call, when you're on a live stream to determine your court's strategy in dealing with a crisis, whether it's COVID or anything else, that these discussions will give you the boundaries. It will make you aware of what the competing considerations are. It'll make you better equipped to come to conclusions for yourself in your own jurisdictions on how to manage a crisis like this. And so that's what we hope to get out of this morning. As I mentioned, you may not walk out with a nice, clear answer, but that's what we hope the objective will be and the utility for a discussion like this. Judge?
Good morning. I'm going to make you all a promise. First of all, you're all in a little bit of trouble. I have a bet with Peter that we'd have less than 10 people, and you guys made me lose. So I have to buy the guy breakfast. I have to buy him breakfast. So you're all in a little bit of trouble, but thank you for getting out of bed and coming. I do appreciate it. Yes, I know it was bribery. I know it was. I like to say I work for Karl up in Sioux Falls, and I do. Karl is my boss. He always giggles when I say that, but Karl is my court administrator, and he really does make the world run for us up in Sioux Falls. So he always giggles when I say it, but that's kind of why I'm here, because court management is way more important than an awful lot of what I do. So pleased to be back. Wanted to make you all a promise, though. Our favorite thing to do is to pick on you all and make you come up here and do our little vignettes where you're assigned a speaker role and then you have to answer questions from the audience. That's super fun. We have more fun with that. You have more fun with that. And I promise you, when we're really back, when it's a full-fledged conference and our numbers are back up and they don't shove us into a 7 a.m. coffee talk session, I promise you we'll be back and we'll be doing that. So go ahead, Peter.
Talk about why we're talking about COVID even now,
Right.
a year and a half later. So.
Okay. Over about the past year, as we all know really, really well, we were concerned, or most of us were preoccupied with operational considerations. Greg, our state court administrator, happens to be here, and he remembers how we scrambled for hand sanitizer. We scrambled for webcams. All right, a webcam that was $29.95 yesterday is $500 now, and I send emails to the staff and say, okay, if anybody has a webcam at home in a box somewhere that you're not using, can we please borrow it? I mean, this desperate kind of stuff. We were, and you all know, we all have those similar stories. It was operations management. It was how do we ramp up remote access? How do we ramp up our video capability? How do we ramp really fast when supply chains are disrupted? It was operations. Mostly, I think, for most of us. Now, though, we're in generally a recovery period. And I think we've switched from operations, where do I get that webcam? Where do I get another 55-gallon drum of hand sanitizer? That disinfecting gun that we use in courtrooms now is $9,000, and where do I get one even if I had $9,000? That's behind us generally, I think, for most of us. And now we're into what, to us, really is an ethical issue, largely an ethical issue. Instead of talking about how we're going to do something, now we talk about what we ought to do, what we should do. And we'll get into some of these later, but as an example, okay, vaccination. As many of you know who pay attention to this kind of stuff, the EEOC advisory is that, yeah, we can mandate vaccines. But should we? Ought we? What's our obligation to each other? What's our obligation to the public? What's our obligation to and our duty to jurors who walk through the door? And the reason we think this is a really fascinating area now, even though in some ways I'm sure we're all tired about COVID, courts are in a really, really difficult position. You know, I mentioned about having competing considerations on the table so we know what they are when we try to come to decisions. Courts are in such a tough position that I think it's really important for us to think this through, and we'll spend time on that this morning. For example, there's a judge in Ohio. Anybody from Ohio here? There's a judge in Ohio, apparently. I mean, if somebody knows the story better, please take over. But there's a judge in Ohio that says, you know, if we're going to compel jurors to come to the courthouse, we want to protect them. We don't want to put them at risk. So I'm going to mandate vaccines for jurors. Well, attorneys immediately filed motions because since vaccination varies by demographics, if you're going to impose a vaccination requirement on jurors, you skew the representativeness of your jury pool. Same thing with court employee vaccination mandates. Now, we found very few of them. Only one comes to mind in my mind. Anybody, and Peter, you may do this, sorry if I'm stealing a slide in the future, but anybody have a vaccination mandate in their courthouses? Yeah, see, I think it's very, very rare. Federal court in South Dakota happens to do that at the moment. They happen to be in a controversy about that, and Judge Sabers might talk a little bit more about that a little later.
Hold on one second. So I have this memo that's kind of juicy, and I'll keep reading from it. It is in the public domain. It's from our chief district federal court judge in South Dakota. But I want to vote on this because one thing I think we're going to agree on. He says, ready? We have an obligation to operate a court system that functions justly, safely, and properly. Justly, safely, properly. If you agree with that, raise your hand. To me, that's kind of an easy one, right? Okay, now, later we'll talk about more of what's in here and we'll see if we can still get agreement. But justly, safely, properly sounds good. Maybe even sounds a little easy, doesn't it? Like, yep, that's our job. That's part of our ethical duty. We have to run a good and safe courthouse so that people can come to us because we're court servants.
Right, but my point here is to try to illustrate the powerful constraints we're under, the competing considerations, the profound competing considerations. As tough as it was to find a webcam for $9,000 about a year ago, this business about trying to balance public protection against representativeness and fairness is profound and powerful stuff. I mean, this is hard. Or you may remember, a lot of us discussed during when the pandemic was ramping up, equity among employees. Schools were closed, daycares were closed, the court employees with kids got to work from home. The court employees who didn't have kids had to come to the building. Is there a fairness and equity issue there? Yeah, there are practical considerations. I mean, so there were some of that, but now that we're in the recovery period, I think these balancing acts are far more difficult and I think make for an enriching and challenging discussion, and that's what we hope to spend a little time on this morning.
Some of the other things that makes COVID different from any other crisis that I can think of we've had for myself, tell me if anybody can think of it, that this crisis is different from anything that I can think of in the history of the American court system. It's the longest running crisis that we've ever had. I mean, most of our continuation of operations plans envision a pretty intense, severe, but short duration crisis. A hurricane comes through, there's horrible tragedy, let's start cleaning up. There's an earthquake, it's bad, there's tragedy, we're cleaning up. We had a crisis that went on for well over a year, and we're still in the middle of the crisis. Some people think we're still in the middle of the crisis. There are many courts out there that had endured multiple concurrent crises, which I can't think of a time when this has happened. I mean, a number of courts. We had courts in the West that had nightly riots. They had wildfires that were choking the population of the large cities and COVID all at the same time. One court administrator I talked to in Napa County said they had the public health officials saying you have to close down the vents on the courthouse because of the wildfires, the smoke was coming in, and then other public health officials said you've got to open up the vents on the courthouse to keep the airflow circulating to get COVID out of your courthouse. I mean, he's caught between the two of them. And finally, what we've heard several times during this conference, and I think we're going to take home with this as a takeaway, is this very well may have changed court administration permanently. Janet.
I think there's an additional crisis that we're faced with, and that is...
Okay. Oh, you got one on there, that side. Okay. I was going to do the Jerry Springer routine, you know.
I think there's an additional crisis that's underway, and that may be questioning of structure, questioning of government, and questioning of authorities.
Good point.
I would add that to this list.
Good point. Good point.
Can I don't mean to monopolize, but thank you for that comment, Janet, because I think you're exactly right. When we talk about mandatory vaccination of court employees and how, yeah, EEOC says that we could. You're right. Here's one of the problems with this crisis that really doesn't come out in a lot of those other short-term crises. There's not a public consensus on this. I mean, all of us walk in the room and almost all of us have the green bracelets on. Now, nationally, vaccination is what, about 60%? Somewhere around a third, 2/3, a third. So in any room in this, if we're representative, and we may not be, but if we're representative, 1/3 of the people with those green bracelets on really ought not to have the green bracelet on. And so I think there's a distinct lack of public consensus. Janet, you mentioned public authority, and I don't think I think as a result of this pandemic, one of the challenges here when we talk about ethics and what's our obligation to the public and what ought we to do and what do we owe each other, what's our public obligation, I don't think there's much consensus on what we ought to do, and I don't think there's much consensus on obedience to public authority or concession to public authority. I mean, I'll bet you there are millions of people in the country that don't care what the CDC says, or they think they're out to lunch or whatever. And so when you don't have that ability to rely on those public assertions and public authorities, I think that makes these discussions even more difficult.
And Karl has quoted from the EEOC a couple of times already to say, yes, as an employer, you can require vaccinations. They actually go further, and their new, as of late May, says not only can you require vaccines, but you can offer incentives. They can't be coercive incentives. You can't say you're fired if you don't do it. That's not really an incentive, but you can offer incentives. So I think in the future, we'll see employers and specifically court systems going to that and wondering about that. But on Janet's questioning of authority comment, I'm back to my magic memo, right? We'll see if we can have a standard agreement on this one, okay? If any of you labor under such extreme views that the federal government is implanting a chip through this vaccine, then you should not work for the federal judiciary and need to find work elsewhere. Right? One more. I truly hope that none of you are so prideful or stubborn that this email steals your resolve not to be vaccinated. But if it does, then you have some soul searching to do about whether you belong in a team setting such as we have here.
And
Same
again,
memo,
this is public domain.
This is public domain. This is all over in our press. All over in our press.
We want to be discreet about federal court in our home jurisdiction, and you do a Google search, it's everywhere.
So our federal court has required a vaccine requirement on their employees. This memo, which was pre-Easter, said it would be by June 1st. I'm not actually sure what the status is. And some of you have heard we've got a federal judge who's actually cited the Marshals Service for contempt for refusing to tell of their vaccination status. That's actually set for trial in September. We've had a special prosecutor appointed. That judge has now recused himself because he'll be a witness in the contempt trial, and so there's been a new judge appointed. So we've got all sorts of vaccination fights up in our state. We've got all sorts of arguments. But when you come back to that same memo, where we started from was complete agreement. We are duty bound to operate a court system that functions justly, safely, and properly. And I don't question for a second that that's what everybody here is trying for and everybody in South Dakota is trying for. It's just there's a whole bunch of different ways to get there. And just because you can do something, do you want to? And ethically, if you're really trying to be fair and respectful to others, what's the right answer? We sure don't have one. I can promise you our state doesn't have one. We can't offer you the right answer here today. But I come back to our NACM canons. 1.3 is fairness. We can't discriminate against people for all sorts of reasons, including language and marital status and socioeconomic status. So if mom can't afford daycare and her kids are at home because the school's closed, what do we do to that employee, right? We have to treat her with fairness. 1.4 is respect of others. We have to treat litigants and co-workers, employees, all others interacting with the court with dignity, respect, and courtesy. How do you do that when there's no agreement on whether you should require masks or no agreement on whether you should require vaccines? That's tough, folks. We are in a very difficult position, and I don't think it's going to be a much easier position anytime in the near future.
The last one we had was 2.7, which is to respect the personal lives of litigants, coworkers, and the public. And so I think when the backs of minds as we're talking about these topics, think about that, whether the policies that we're coming up with add to that respect to their personal lives. Yes, Janet.
This little memo that you read seems to have some loaded words in it. I don't remember what they were. If you come to the unfounded view of blah, 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 it seems to have some loaded words in it. Is that complying with have respect for people's views? I don't think so. And it seems to have some built-in biases based on the words and the descriptors used. That's very interesting. That kind of goes contrary to what judges are usually trained to do, to make communications fairly neutral.
And as Karl likes to point out when we talk about this memo, this was an internal court memo, right, that's now been published in every paper in the state of South Dakota. So someone somewhere was angry and decided to share an internal court memo, right? So clearly there's not agreement, and clearly people are struggling with this. I would say, and you know, the mask issue is an interesting one. So we've dropped our mask mandate in our courthouse. My courtroom is still wearing masks, and Karl thought that was my fault. He learned yesterday it wasn't necessarily my fault. I've got a couple of older lawyers who appear regularly in my courtroom. They also care for grandchildren, and they've got daughter-in-laws and son-in-laws who are in the medical profession, and they desperately want to keep wearing masks, because if they're going to see 40 people every day, you know, at a 6-inch distance in my courtroom, they also want to be able to go say, I wasn't infected this week, and go see their grandkids on the weekend. So I let my lawyers vote, and they voted unanimously, in part out of deference for this woman, to keep wearing masks. So we're still wearing masks. So I'm taking flack for that. Not sure that's fair, but oh well, I'll take the flack. We're going to keep wearing masks because that makes some people in my courtroom more comfortable. I'm fine. I can be bad cop on that. But you think of that, it also makes other people uncomfortable, right? Some people truly despise the mask, either because they think it's some sort of political statement, or because they struggle to breathe, or for whatever reason. You cannot find unanimity of opinion as to mask, as to vaccine, as to anything. So when we write a rule that says we're going to be fair to all and we're going to show respect to all, how in the world do you work through that when you're trying to deal with COVID and just really the lack of, I guess, general or popular opinion on that?
So, other comments? Anything? So, excellent. Be sure to speak up if you have something to say.
Anybody requiring masks still? Anybody's courtroom still requiring masks?
Here we go. Okay.
Our county's requiring them in the building.
Okay.
But inside the courthouse, if you're vaccinated, no. If you are not vaccinated, yes.
Okay, 2 questions. One, is it being enforced?
As far as our employees go, or
Yep.
the masks, externally, yes, the sheriffs are forcing people to wear masks.
When people show up and say they're vaccinated, are you asking for some sort of proof of that, or just on our system?
No, well, for the public, if you're in a public area, everyone needs to be masked, vaccinated or not.
Okay.
And then if you're in a employee area, we're giving an incentive. So if you show a 2 vaccine card, you'll get a $5 gift card to a coffee shop within the building.
Did you bring me a $5 gift card today? I've got my card. I've got my card. And what jurisdiction are you from?
This is Multnomah Circuit Court in Portland.
Okay. Okay. And are people fighting you on the masks? Are people arguing? What's your status?
The masks are not a problem. The vaccine, we have a few outliers who are not wanting to get vaccinated. So that's still on the table, you know, what's going to happen in the future. But, you know, in Portland, we're over the 70% vaccination mark, and we're doing pretty well. So
That's excellent.
That is excellent. Okay, thank you. Who else?
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
There you go.
So we actually just had a judges meeting where they said that we're done with masks, we're done with social distancing. They are currently dismantling any sort of plexiglass, any sort of safety precautions in the courtroom.
Dismantling them.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Whether or not you're vaccinated or not, and no one has to wear a mask, they're acting like it's completely done.
Oh.
That's a really good point. Thank you for raising it, because, you know, we already all have a sense of this, that there's a fatigue involved. So we can talk about ethics and we can talk about what our obligations are to each other in the public and to jurors and that sort of thing. But you're right, there's a whole fatigue dynamic to all this that really doesn't occur in a lot of other crises that we have to manage because, as Peter said, they're short term. That, yeah, okay, there was some natural disaster, there was some building emergency, there was some building failure, but it doesn't last a year and a half, and that sort of fatigue angle, or I am done with this,
Right.
doesn't quite apply.
People are just over it. Whether they're over it or not,
Right.
they've decided they're over it.
Yes, and like
Yep.
you said, the mask issue is so highly politicized. I mean, I'm from Idaho, so hardly anyone is vaccinated. I mean, people just don't care, frankly.
Right, yeah, because, you know, I'm sorry, Ed, you're right, you know, we're from South Dakota. You know, we would joke, COVID doesn't exist in South Dakota for a while, and our governor had a very particular approach to all this, and we still did the rally, we still did the state fair, and I swear there were 5,000 people in the grandstand at the state fair for the monster truck rally, and I think they sat closer to each other than they otherwise would have, just because they were done with it. They were done with it. So you're right. I mean, there's this regional variation to this debate that also, I mean, when a courthouse is whacked in a single jurisdiction, the courthouse is whacked in a single jurisdiction. When it's a national thing like this, and there are competing regions who come to different conclusions, this is really tough.
Did you have something from online?
Kent?
Yeah, I'm just trying to determine where this person is from.
Oh.
Okay.
It cuts off on the.
Okay. Who else will offer what their courthouse is doing? Red shirt? Where are you from?
St. Louis.
St. Louis. Okay. We're going to hear about Missouri now, folks.
We don't have that kind of time. I think in response to her comment about, you know, people just don't care at this point. Yeah, I think that's very real, but I think we're talking on a national level here. But if you think about these same principles on a local level in municipal courts, people have multiple cases in multiple jurisdictions. They have no idea what's going on. This side of the river is Democratic, this side of the river is Republican. And what do you do? I mean, it speaks to our transparency and practices, how we struggle with that. And if we're struggling with it, the public is totally struggling with it. They have no idea what's going on, who to believe, what we're supposed to do. And is it that they don't care, or you really don't know what we're supposed to be doing?
Yeah.
In St. Louis County, we kind of have the same as in Portland. I mean, if you're in a public area, you have to have a mask on, vaccinated or not. Then that begs the question, then why am I vaccinated to begin with? And then it's all cyclical. It just doesn't end, but it's all very, very subjective. And I think that's really hard because it's like, I don't care at this point. Like, just come to court and let's get your stuff taken care of.
Yes, we do it, and this will be really quick. We do an ethics scenario that talks about whether your ethics shift depending on where you're standing. For example, we would do, okay, if you're a clerk at the front counter and somebody asks you who's a good attorney, you would never tell them in a million years. If your friend asks you at a weekend barbecue at your house when you're all sitting around the cooler, you know, who's a good attorney? The temptation to tell them is a little stronger. So it's like, okay, if I'm here, these are my ethical obligations. If I'm here, these are my ethical obligations. And you're right, when it comes to adjoining buildings in a government complex, courthouse and county or whatever it might be, okay, now I got to wear a mask. Now I don't. And or if I'm in Judge Sabers' courtroom, I've got to put the mask on. If I'm out in the lobby, I don't. And that's really tough.
It's a question of geography. It's not of ethics. Yeah.
Yeah.
You had a comment?
Go ahead, Mark. Oh,
Yeah, so I was just, so I'm from Vermont, and we have 86% vaccination rate in the state of Vermont.
you do not. Well, first of all, way to go.
We do. And we have a Republican governor, but he has been right up front the whole time. He believes in the science, and he's, educate, and I think he's done a fantastic job, actually. At our courts, we have anyone coming into the building as public has to wear a mask regardless. Staff only have to wear a mask if they're not vaccinated. If you're vaccinated, you do not have to wear a mask. And they're not requiring proof of vaccination, but if you don't show proof, then you have to wear a mask.
Oh,
So that was kind of
interesting twist.
yes,
Sure.
yes. And what I'm seeing right now is kind of an interesting dynamic between staff. There's some hard feelings going on, you know, between the ones that are vaccinated and the ones that are choosing not to be vaccinated, which there's not a large number, but, you know, that, you know, they have to, we're still having them be separated, social distanced, so we've moved desks, we've moved people, and they all just want to get back into the same area they were in, but we can't do that because some are choosing not to be vaccinated, and that's what's creating an issue.
And interesting, and sorry to come back to Idaho, right? To come back to Idaho, and there's a huge difference to me whether you're going to affirmatively require masks, affirmatively require vaccines, versus we've got all these new safety protections in place, we've got this plexiglass all over our courthouse, and we're gonna take it down. I mean, wow, now I think that we will see as a society all sorts of safety things that we're going to stick with, right? I don't know that my doctor's office is going to get back the communal coffee pot, right? My doctor's office has tables now spread out so that even if I wanted to sit next to someone, I really couldn't. Our shared magazines and all our doctors' lobbies, they're all gone, right? A lot of those things I think we're not going to see come back. But it's interesting, if you've gone to the trouble of putting the plexiglass up, to affirmatively make that decision to take it back down, which is just kind of a wow to me, I will admit. But go ahead.
This is the first comment we have out of our chat. This is from Constance Delancey, who's a senior court administrator in the Bahamas. And they say they are still required to wear masks for all employees and court users except when speaking behind a plexiglass barrier in the court.
Okay. Okay.
Thanks, Ken.
I did just want to say
Yeah,
another thing
yeah.
that I think helped staff and the public feel more comfortable. The judiciary hired a doctor that is an expert in infectious diseases
Oh,
to consult with us,
I like
to
that.
tell us, you know, what we should be doing, and we've continued that process. We're still doing it now. We have meetings.
and how was the doctor's advice communicated? Did he or she get to speak to staff and make a presentation, or?
Well, there's videos, and those go out to everybody in the judiciary if they choose to watch it. And,
If they choose to watch it.
Right, right. And he has also visited some of the courts that I supervised because we were the first ones to go back doing jury trials. So he came in and told us, you know, I gave him my ideas of how I wanted the courtroom set up. And, you know, he gave me some advice on some of that stuff. So it's been very helpful, and I think in a lot of ways it made everyone feel better.
Just a goofy analogy to think about, because I've heard the masks compared to speed limits. Well, I don't care how fast you drive as long as you don't hit my car, right? I don't care if you drive 90 as long as you're not unsafe to me, but you might be at 90, right? Versus no shirt, no shoes, no service. Well, I don't care whether you're wearing shoes in my gas station parking lot or not, because I'm wearing shoes so I can make myself safe. But somebody made the analogy, well, but if I can be infected by your breath, then it does matter, right? Whether you're wearing a mask or not. So maybe it's not the same thing as you wearing shoes, because if I wear shoes, I'm automatically protected from whatever it is that I'm worried about you tracking in. So there are different analogies to think about, but I think that helps when we're trying to think of how could people be on the opposite side of this. People are scared of the vaccine. People aren't scared of the vaccine. People are really frustrated with masks. People aren't frustrated with masks. And guess what? We're the court system. We have to welcome all of those people into our building. We have to serve all of those people. We have to make sure that when their case is ready to be heard, it's being heard. And that's hard to do when people are so all over the place on this. So, did I interrupt, Kent? Did you get your whole? Okay, yeah.
That's actually kind of a segue into what I was going to say is is, well, in our court, you have to wear a mask. There's a sign on the door, you know, if you're vaccinated, no mask needed, but if you're not vaccinated, please wear a mask. So out in the area, and in the public areas, you know, we have a variety. But when you come into our offices behind the secure doors, if you have shown your vaccine card to your supervisor, it gets entered into our workday, and then you don't have to wear a mask. But if you haven't, then you have to wear a mask. But one of the things that we've been doing, because we feel that the mask is to protect your breath from, it's protecting the other person. It's not protecting yourself. So we wear like this, and if somebody's coming within the 6 feet of us and they are uncomfortable, you know, do you want me to put my mask on? And then we put it on. So it's by individual, not so much by like, this is the area I'm in, I'm going to wear it or not. But do you want me to wear my mask? Then I'll wear it for you. And that's more of a respect for that person who, for whatever they're feeling. And so, you know, I'm hearing all this information, but if somebody comes in 6 feet of you and says, can you wear your mask? I think as court employees, we're going to put on our mask.
Yesterday, I got into a cab when I hit San Diego. I come out of the airport where I'm wearing my mask. I get into the cab wearing my mask. The cab driver doesn't have her mask on, and she says, do you want my mask on? And I said, no, I'm perfectly fine. One, I've had the virus. I almost wear that as a badge of honor. I had the virus. My lovely boys who were masked up all day in school weren't masked up all day at football practice and brought it home to me as a gift. So my whole house has had the virus, and I'm double vaccinated. But I wore my mask because I didn't know if she was vaccinated, and I didn't know if I would scare her if I got into her cab with no mask on. Same thing. I wear my mask all over the place, and it's not to protect me. I feel pretty confident I'm pretty well protected. If I don't have the immunities by now, then I'm in real trouble, right? But I'm still wearing my mask because I think it makes other people more comfortable around me.
Thanks for raising that, because, you know, we'll talk, you know, I talk about, okay, we should all know what the balancing considerations are, but somebody might think, well, yeah, okay, but that doesn't get us to an answer. That doesn't help all that much. I think you put your finger on one way that we might forge some solutions to these competing considerations sometimes, and that's to individualize those interactions, rather than, you know, draw those boundaries, so, okay, here I wear mine, here I don't. If you individualize it, and I think you're exactly right, Judge, now I've gotten into the habit of asking people, do you shake hands? And a lot of them do, some of them don't. I mean, we do that, which feels kind of silly to me personally, but when you individualize that and you change those social interaction habits, I think that's one potential resolution to a lot of these really tough shifts we're going through.
And on the individual, again, where I sit in my courtroom, guess what? I am magically 6 feet away from everybody. Nobody's coming that close to me. I'm not really at risk, but I got a whole bunch of people in my courtroom who are. So, and I am trying to be respectful of that. We had a litigant the other day who couldn't come to court because he was in jail and on COVID protocol because there had been an exposure. And so we delayed it one day so that he could appear by Zoom the next day. Easy enough, right? Well, they showed up in court the next day. I'm like, wait a minute. you were on day 1 of your 14-day quarantine yesterday, but today you're in my courtroom with no mask. Well, no, let's mask up, right? So very individualized, but I think we all have to be aware of that as we move forward.
Other comments?
Yeah.
Terry.
Yes, our county manager put out an email to all employees that if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask. If you're unvaccinated, you should wear a mask. Well, court employees are very attuned to language such as that.
Should, could, would, yep.
Yes. And so they took the should as a I don't have to. So we've since had to issue an administrative order clarifying it for them that, no, it's a must.
Right, not the best word choice, because I think the nation as a whole right now reads should as I don't have to, right?
Exactly.
I mean, that's how we're reading it. And I will tell you, and you know, Karl made the joke about everybody in green bracelet, somebody's lying, right? if everybody's got the green bracelet, somebody's not telling the truth. But I go into stores and the sign will say, if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask. Well, again, we're about 50, maybe 60% vaccinated in South Dakota, but there's no one in that store wearing a mask. So, right? It's the should element.
You know, and it's actually some of our, I'm from Las Vegas, and some of the casinos have come up with a creative way of dealing with it. If their employees show proof of vaccination, they're good. If they don't want to be vaccinated, they're required to come in every week with a negative test result.
Oh.
And so you do that weekly. It incentivizes you to go get vaccinated. And that is something we're considering. I've talked to county, because our county manager will not mandate vaccines. And I'm not entirely comfortable mandating it until it's been FDA approved. You know, I am a little uncomfortable ethically with mandating something that's not fully approved. But that, to me, that's a good alternative, because we have maybe a third of our staff is still not vaccinated. We had a third that got COVID. We've had up to 50% of our staff in quarantine at any point in time. And so I'm just kind of surprised at how many of them are not taking this seriously. It's actually very disappointing to me. I think it shows a lack of consideration for your coworkers.
Can I ask, and I'll be transparent here, and it's probably immediately apparent. I'm asking this question to generate really juicy discussion that I think at some point we need to have. We don't mandate, or previously, we would never in 1,000 years ever consider mandating anything medical with any employees. Whether it comes to smoking choices, or whether it comes to how you live, or whether you eat that 5th Twinkie today, or, I mean, we had health and wellness stuff like most of us do. But we would never have thought of this before, or taking somebody's temperature before. What gives us the right to do it now? What gives the PJ or the county manager the right to say, should or must? Where do we get that authority now?
Well, you have a choice to work somewhere. And
right, but my point is, and you're right. Yeah. But where do we suddenly get? We didn't call the shots on who gets the shingle vaccine yesterday. So why is it okay now?
I don't know. Our schools mandate vaccines. We require
And mandate school.
Yes.
Our kids have to go to school and have to have their shots before they go.
They can homeschool. There's alternatives. We require criminal background checks. We require our marshals. Actually, everybody's required to get drug tested now.
Court employees? Court employees get drug tested?
All county employees get drug tested upon initial hire now. Drug testing. Our marshals go through physicals. They go through a psych and a polygraph evaluation. We have all kinds of things that we mandate as conditions of employment. To me, this is one more condition of employment.
Because you have the choice to work elsewhere. I mean,
exactly.
When Costco put up the sign that said masks are required, you had the choice. If you didn't want to go to Costco, don't go to Costco, right? You have those choices. And that's really the counter argument. You want to work here, here are the requirements.
I was just going to say, you were asking where do we get the authority, but I think if you can declare a state of emergency, I think a lot of things are suspended in that moment. And I think, depending on government itself, but I think you can probably find a lot of leeway if you are in a state of emergency.
Well, I think you brought up a good point that we mentioned is this is the longest running crisis of the American court system that we've ever experienced. You were in a state of emergency over a hurricane. It lasts for several days, a week, maybe 2 weeks. But I mean, there is legitimate debate right now. Are we still in a state of emergency? Yes, we are. No, we're not. I mean, we can't even agree on that.
I mean, yes, and where I'm from, we actually have a lot of just anti-government people in general. We have a lot of constitutionalists who, come to court and fight every aspect of it because they just don't believe in the government. So it varies, I think, regionally.
Kent.
So here we have a question from Jeff Chappell on the NACM board. So do we mandate the flu shot?
At what point does this become discriminatory?
That's an excellent question. It's one of them that's up there. Eventually we'll get to it, but.
And I think we have an interesting confluence of personal choice, personal belief, Science, religion, and faith. I have a brother and sister-in-law with deeply held religious beliefs where they should not have to get the vaccine. They have chosen for the good of the country to get the vaccine. Kudos. I have a friend who has dietary and homeopathy beliefs, and she is refusing to get the vaccine and wants to go out and sit 1 foot away from me without a mask. I am just left scratching my head. We have a conflict of personal choice, belief in science, and religious or faith groundings. This is such an interesting challenge.
It is. And Karl gave the example of if we're requiring jurors to be vaccinated, are we limiting the people who are going to serve as our jurors? Sure, right? We're excluding the folks that don't get the vaccine for whatever reason. But watching, I had the privilege of getting to review juror questionnaires these last 6 or so months to help our PJ, who was reviewing an awful lot of juror questionnaires. And we would have people who say, I'm 83 years old, I've been on quarantine since this hit, I'm frightened and I don't want to come. So we're excluding those people and we're letting them stay home because I don't think in good conscience we can make them come to a courthouse. And I for sure don't think we can make them come to a courthouse and sit with 150 unmasked strangers, right? If they're truly that scared, I think that's probably a disservice and not showing respect to others. So we've been letting those people not come into jury service. Well, guess what's happening? So now our litigants, especially in civil cases, they're saying, well, now I've got a jury that doesn't look like our real society looks, right? Because we're excluding these groups of people. Maybe I want the 83-year-old retired woman on my jury going to help me and I can't have her, so I don't want my jury trial right now. And we saw that it really slowed down our criminal docket too, because lawyers didn't want to try their bigger cases, their murders and their rapes, because they were worried about, are we just going to have a bunch of 22-year-old kids on our jury? Is that what our jury is going to look like? Because they're the only ones willing to come to the courthouse without a mask and without a vaccine and sit with a bunch of strangers? That's not what we want our jurors to look like either. So again, it comes back to we're weighing personal preference, we're weighing beliefs, we're weighing real beliefs and fake beliefs, right? Because some people are just taking a position to take a position and maybe don't even believe it. But we've got people all over the country, and again, we're the court system. We're supposed to help all of these people, regardless of whether we agree with their position or not. And how do we do that? How are we respectful and fair to all of those who come through our door?
And Courtney's brought up a good point, which actually we were going to get to, but maybe we talk about it a little bit now, is even if your court is not requiring employees to be vaccinated, we certainly have at our disposal a number of rewards and sanctions that we've already talked about, ranging from $5 gift cards. I know some places said you can have half day off with pay to go get vaccinated. One of the questions that we were talking about privately was, well, what does that do, one, to the employee who says, I don't believe in the vaccinations, I don't think it's appropriate, but I still want a half day off. I want to go to the mall for a half day. Why does this person get a half day? And maybe they lie to say that they got the COVID vaccine or whatever. I mean, are you going to check to make sure? But also, vaccination can take 15 minutes. I think when we got vaccinated, it took us about a half an hour to drive up, open up the car door, roll up my sleeve, get jabbed, and I'm driving off. 4 hours, hey, that's pretty cool. We can go to the mall. And in the reverse, are there sanctions or protections that we can impose, which folks will think of as sanctions? We've already talked about some of the social distancing. You have somebody who isn't vaccinated and maybe refuses to wear a mask. Well, okay, you can still come to work, but we're putting you in a closet and you're going to do your work in a separate room away from everybody else because everyone else is afraid of you. Well, at what point does that become, I'm being discriminated against, you're not respecting me, I should be out in the open office area with everybody else. So I think that's a very good question that we need to ponder. Go ahead, Courtney.
This may be wildly unpopular, and I'm used to that, so it's okay. But I think a lot of this, and this is just my opinion, could be solved with just mind your own business. I don't ask you about your religious preferences, your political views. If you've had the flu vaccine, I don't tell you I don't like your shoes. I mean, it's none of my business. And if somebody wants to be, do we have to use technical terms? It's almost 8, so I guess we do at this point. But I don't care. I mean, here's what the facts are, depending upon which side of the line you fall on. Fine. I don't care. But we have a job to do. We need to be in our courts doing our job. If the public decides that they want to fall on whatever side of the line they want to fall on, why are we still continuing to try to police all of that? Here's the rules. I'm not asking you for your card. I'm not going to chastise you for not getting it. I'm not going to give you a high five for getting it. I don't care. We have a job to do, and whether you have a vaccination or not does not impact my responsibility to deal with your case fair and impartially. As far as safe, we have a bailiff. So, I mean, I think all of that has taken on like a new definition, you know, and it's really expanded it. But to me, it's all subjective as well. So is there really an answer? No. So let's just mind our own business and go back to work.
Any other comments? Go ahead.
Yeah.
I respectfully, completely disagree. Because, yeah, no, I mean, this is a deadly disease, and someone else's. No.
So was the flu at one point. So, I mean,
No, I know people that have died. I know people that have nearly died. It is a deadly virus.
Do you know people that have died of pneumonia or the flu? Or it's
Not in these numbers. Not in these numbers. And I mean, I believe it's real. And unfortunately, in Las Vegas, I was looking at our local paper. We just had 8 hospital employees that got it because they all attended a party. They were all vaccinated back in December and January. So now it appears that perhaps the vaccine is not as good as it was touted to be, or that it does wear off after a few months. I think we may be back to mask mandates. But someone else's behavior can cost someone else their life. And so,
Well, and in that
I
sense,
think that's part
the
of our,
analogy would be smoke-free buildings, right? I don't care whether you smoke. I don't want to inhale your smoke,
Exactly.
but
I mean,
I don't
I think-
care whether you smoke.
I think it's
right.
part of our obligation for the safety component for our coworkers, for the public that comes into our building. I think we're obligated to do everything we can to make them safe.
And I think that's a good point, but I think it's a boundary issue because,
Is his
for
mic
example,
not on?
we work in a system that tries to do repair work for personally destructive things all the time. And we don't outlaw personally destructive things like alcohol. I mean, we don't do prohibition anymore. We're loosening up marijuana laws all across the country. And so we allow personally destructive activity, harmful activity, in a lot of contexts, but not this one. And
Well, but
how
we allow alcoholics to drink themselves to death in the privacy of their own home, but we don't allow people to consume too much alcohol and go drive on the streets
Right.
where they might hurt me, right? So we do have limits in that sense as well.
Sure,
Idaho.
sure.
I like hearing from Idaho.
To me, it's an issue of ethically, since we're talking about ethics, about whether or not you prioritize a person's health and safety over their own perceived rights. Obviously, I'm in a camp that no, a person's health and safety and their own life is more important than your perceived right whether or not to wear a mask. But where I'm from, most people just don't care about other people's lives. They say it outright. They legitimately do not care if people are dying from it. They don't want to wear a mask, and that is more important than protecting other people.
You could also go the other way, because even if I'm vaccinated, I can carry it. I cannot know about it. I might not know I'm carrying it at the moment, and I go to the mall or I go to the grocery store, and there are unvaccinated people not wearing masks, and I know there are unvaccinated people not wearing masks. So if I'm carrying it, I'm a vaccinated person, and I'm not masking, is that ethical for me to possibly kill somebody in the grocery store because they're not vaccinated and they're not wearing a mask, but I know that they're not vaccinated and wearing a mask because we know people aren't. So going back the other way, do we all need to mask up again?
We do have something of an analogy here, going back to the old smoking laws. Originally, smoking kills, and then after a number of years, secondary smoke kills. And that's why that's one of the main reasons why we have prohibited smoking anywhere in public buildings. Now, we know what the percentage rates of deaths from COVID is because they have been announced and they're carefully analyzed. I'm not even sure if I can remember what the mortality rate is from folks who had secondary smoke, but we already know that it's higher in folks who smoke, but I think that a percentage rate, if you look at 100 people who smoke, overall it's supposed to be, 5 people out of 100 would get lung cancer, and with secondary smoke it might be slightly less. That's getting kind of close to what the percentage is with COVID, about 2%. If you have 100 people with COVID, two of those people will die. And so the percentage of mortality and the threat is kind of the same with smoking. And we never had this debate with secondary smoke. Everybody was just completely on board, get smoking out of public buildings.
Oh, that's not true.
Really?
Not everybody was on board.
My experience, I've never heard anybody saying, no, I demand to smoke in the middle of the courthouse.
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
I can promise you there was debate about how can you prevent me from doing what I perceive to be my right to smoke wherever I want to smoke. Oh, I promise you there was debate.
Oh, really?
Oh,
Okay.
yes.
I do
yes.
know of people
Yes.
who would go into the restroom, open up the window of the courthouse and, be smoking and blowing it out the window and then close the window and then go back to work, and you could smell it on their breath. But
Right, and as you can imagine, we have a smoking area outside the back doors, and so you'll go out the back doors of the courthouse and you've got to get through the cloud, and so every once in a while, our PJ and I will get an employee email about, I really shouldn't have to walk through that cloud at the back of the courthouse.
And maybe one of the things is the result is immediate, whereas with COVID, it's still unknown in the respect. I mean, you walk through a cloud of COVID, you don't know it. You're not going to know it for 2 or 3 days if you get it. If you walk through a cloud of smokers, you know immediately. And so there's an immediate reaction to that sort of thing.
Yeah, and working for the courts, we all know that when it comes to regulation of personal behavior, it's not always rational. I can get cited. I can get a $100, you might know, Judge, a traffic ticket for not wearing a seatbelt. But if I'm on a motorcycle without a helmet in South Dakota, my body can fly 500 feet through the air, and I'm okay. And so, yeah, when it comes to that regulation of personal behavior, it isn't always rational.
I'm sorry, I know we're running out of time, but I have an important question for the judge.
Uh-oh.
So one of my colleagues, her mother is immune compromised, has lymphoma, and has been going through chemo for some time. And she's in a group home of about 6 people. She's fully vaccinated. Everyone in the group home was fully vaccinated. And the owner of the group home was fully vaccinated. Unbeknownst to my colleague or her mother, one of the caregivers, who are hard to find because people who in low-paid caregiving roles are hard to find, was not fully vaccinated because she had a understanding that because she was going to get married and because she was pregnant, she didn't think it was safe for her to get vaccinated. She got COVID. And she gave COVID to my colleague's mother, who was fully vaccinated and who was then hospitalized. And she's now out of the hospital, but another person in that same facility who was 95 also got COVID, was hospitalized, but luckily did not die. So I come around to the question for you. If a judge somewhere in the US mandates a person to be present in the courtroom and that person is immune compromised, and then they get COVID, and then they die because someone in that courthouse or in that courtroom was not fully vaccinated, who's liable?
Who knows? Who knows? And if I didn't know, I still couldn't answer it because of my day job. But we come back to red dress, and I'm sorry, I forgot where she was from. But the whole mind your own business, I don't care. Okay, but the lady in the nursing home didn't get to pick. That wasn't her choice to get hospitalized. Wasn't the 95-year-old's choice to die. So it is, again, we come back to how in the world are you supposed to juggle all of the personal preferences, the personal beliefs, and still we're trying to stay open. I will tell you in my own personal courtroom, if I have someone who says, I'm too scared to come to the building, they appear by Zoom, right? And the only time I don't let them appear by Zoom is if magically they have multiple warrants out for their appearance. And then I think maybe it's not quite the fear of COVID that is keeping them away, right? So there are ways we can try to fix that, but right, we have the power to force jurors to come to our building. We have that power. We have the power to force litigants to come to our building, which is why this is tough stuff. This is tough stuff. And then we have rules that say be fair, respectful of people's personal lives and personal beliefs, and don't discriminate. Well, that's not the easiest thing in the world when you're trying to deal with a pandemic. Yeah.
Any other comments? Well, we have actually a choice here. I don't. The first question that we were going to pose to all you, I think it's possible that we have talked it thoroughly, which is, can courts require employees to be vaccinated? So I don't know if you want to move to the second question, which I don't think this topic has come up yet. Courts now have many employees who telework. Would ask, let me have a show of hands. How many of you are going to continue to allow a substantial portion of your employees to telework even after COVID is done? Show of hands. Not so many, huh? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4.
We're allowing some depending on what their job.
So for the rest of you, you're going to be cutting back on that and requiring more and more of your folks to come to work?
Is it dependent upon what their job duties require and how easy it is to telework? Is it dependent upon fear of COVID or something else? Or did somebody decide it's actually more efficient to let them telework? What was the decision based on?
The last.
Okay.
We found there was or I have found that a certain, we have a position called a case manager, and they meet with litigants over child support issues, and they've been doing it, via WebEx, or it's just another form of Zoom,
Sure.
basically. And we found it was a higher percentage of people that participated. And they didn't get as contentious because they weren't sitting next to each other in a small room. So it's actually worked really well, and we're going to continue that. It's hard for the regular staff because our job is customer service, right?
Is.
So that's a difficult one, but I think we can balance it. If someone comes in and says, "Hey, my kid's sick at home, I need to be home," I would like to see them to be able to do that and work from home. I mean, I think we need to be more flexible and more understanding of people's lives and what they have going on. So,
Rick, did you have a comment? I thought I saw your hand up.
We do have a telework policy we just instituted last week.
And is it health-based or other-based?
You gave 3 possible options, and it's the first and the third. So yes, we are. It is not health-based, although I think that's underlying. So, but it is based upon whether we thought we were more efficient, and that it was of an employee benefit. It's hard to say because it's in its infancy whether it's working, but I do think we've been proving for the last 16 months that it does work. And not everyone, as your first option was based upon whether it was job related, and it is. There are certain tasks and certain duties, and this is at the AOC. This is not at the district court level. So it remains to be seen how effective it'll be for the employees, but I think it is already showing in its infancy that they appreciated. I think there are some that would have liked to have been out 5 days, but many are saying that this is at least something in the right direction, at least out to telework for 2 days. They were proven we're more effective than, or at least as efficient and effective as we were in the office, because now you're available a lot more often, and it's easier to juggle, I think, more things at once than it is in the office.
I will tell you, even in my own building, when lawyers started asking to appear by Zoom, we had one judge who was really angry about it. I don't know what to say other than angry. Thought lawyers were choosing to stay in their basements in their pajamas and were just too lazy to come to the courthouse, and how dare you? And was saying things like, you have to prove that you have an underlying medical condition that puts you at higher risk, or you're appearing in my courtroom. For me, and I'm kind of an efficiency freak, for me, lawyers would email me and say, can I appear by Zoom? And I'd say, yep, sounds great. And especially the prosecutors in criminal actions, if they've got 10 sentencings before me in a day and they can sit in their office and they Zoom, and we're wired for Zoom, and our tech right now is just beautiful. We've got, Zoom is just as good in my courtroom as it is being there in person. And they could do 10 hearings, but they could still get 2 hours of work done in their office at their desk. I wasn't going to say no to that. So again, regardless of COVID, if somebody, except if we're in trial, if somebody wants to Zoom it in, I'm freakishly open about that, because I do think there are lots of good reasons that have nothing to do with COVID that make Zoom appearances and remote appearances some really good practical advice.
Any other comments? I think we've got time just for the final wrap up on this. The ethics question that we put to this was, is there a fundamental fairness issue about employees teleworking? Some employees get to telework, other employees don't. Employees who want to telework can't. Employees who don't want to telework and come back into the courthouse have to stay home or have the option to stay home. We've already talked about, and maybe one of the questions I would have is, before COVID, if you had a child care problem, the impression I got is, that's your problem. Godspeed on trying to fix it. And now we're a lot more understanding about it, which I think is just wonderful. But is that a change in human resources policy that we've seen? I don't know.
For your telework policy, does it deal with who gets to telework? Does it set those selection criteria?
Yes, it does.
But it's by nature of job. It's not by, say, for example, family demographic.
That's correct, and it is not permitted to be used as an excuse for a substitution for child care or guardian care. So, but I will say that I definitely think there's a fairness issue, and I think that where it really comes into play is the actual setup of the office. If you were in a situation where employees can isolate and social distance from one another, is it something that is necessary to have a telework for all of those individuals? Case in point, back in February of 2020, I had just left the NACM mid-year conference in Charlotte. I work in an open floor plan, and there are no offices. And I have two colleagues who are 18 inches from me. And so I can hear every conversation. Obviously, they can hear every conversation from me. We have that particle board that separates us. Regardless of, other questions regarding it from a public health and safety perspective, we always have had issues where air circulation, and whether we have constantly recirculated colds and other seasonal flu to everyone, in large part because of the dynamic and the setup of the office. There's no way we could prove that, but we feel pretty confident that we're sharing germs. This is now something that obviously we were sharing was a lot more deadly. When I came back in February of 2020, I told my colleagues we should not be, and if this thing continues to go south, we should not be here at the same time. And it was a month later, and we were all out. And that I think speaks to a fairness issue. If you have a floor plan where the office is set up where people are very close to one another, and obviously many of us do, and particularly in the district courts, and then others who are able to telework do not have that, they have more protection. Is that really a fairness issue? Is there an obligation as employers that we do our best to keep employees safe? If we're going to require them to work, can we put them in a location that is at least gives some social distance and some unknown barrier of safety, in protection? And if we're not going to do that, are we going to permit them to telework? And if not, if we're going to restrict them in both, is that really fair?
Is that respecting them at the level that our own ethical rules require us? Yeah.
I think we're at the time limit, so I'll just say each of us may have to thank you for contributing. Oh,
Well, I'll finish. I just highlighted, it's a 2-page email, so no, but Karl could give you the link to it. Here's the other one. This is on vaccinations. Although I do not expect any of you to be so calculating, no one should expect that they can refuse to get vaccinated and thereby continue teleworking, because that will not happen.
Yeah.
yeah, excellent.
I am not a lifetime appointee. I did not write that memo.
So thank you so very much. I've always contended that the majority of the wisdom in NACM lies with you folks, and so thank you for sharing your wisdom with all of us.
And good luck. None of this is easy. I know we don't have any answers, for which we apologize, but good luck, and we hope to see everybody back when we can do our real thing again. So thank you, folks.
Thank you.